Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. We're going to be diving into an extremely important topic on farm that probably doesn't get as much thought and care about it as we might think that we put into it, and that is keeping our kids safe, whether they are toddlers all the way up to teens. We're going to be having that discussion here this afternoon with a fantastic expert in this area, and that will be Melissa Pleckelman, who's the outreach specialist with the National Farm Medicine Center at Marshfield Clinic Research Institute. So Melissa, I'm excited just to kind of jump into today's discussion because it's one that we think about safety generally on the farm in terms of, making sure we know where our people are at, doing adequate training, but sometimes it falls by the wayside, especially when it's a little bit different on the family side of things, if you will. And so going into today's discussion, I know we're going to have probably a lot of questions coming through about what certain things mean in terms of age appropriate, which we'll get to. But I just want to let our audience know that they're watching live. You can ask your questions as we go through here today, and we'll take them throughout today's episode. But with all of that being said, with all that mumbo jumbo out of the way in the beginning, Melissa, would you mind giving us a brief introduction about yourself here?
Yeah, I would love to. My name is Melissa Pluckelman, and I grew up on a small dairy farm and a diverse dairy farm in Stetsonville, Wisconsin. So it's about 45 minutes west of Wausau. And we had anywhere from 45 to 60 dairy cows that we were milking. And then we had every other farm animal you can imagine: pigs, chickens, goats, sheep, rabbits. If you can think of a farm animal, we probably had it on our farm. And I grew up learning how to work and learning what farming was and really enjoying it. And then I went off to UW River Falls, where I graduated with a degree in agricultural education, came back to my home school of Colby, and I taught for 6 years at the Colby High School and Middle School. I taught agricultural education. Upon leaving the school system, I came to the National Farm Medicine Center as well as the National Children's Center, where we focus on research of farm incidents and injuries and how can those be prevented. And then we focus on giving resources and services back to farmers to protect themselves and their families while they're working on the farm.
Well, Melissa, I'm excited to dive into this discussion because, as I was saying earlier, it's so easy to let some bad habits get in the way of what we're doing. And really, at the end of the day, it's the utmost importance of keeping everybody on the farm safe, especially the littlest ones all the way up through teens, and making sure what they're doing is appropriate and safe, and ultimately having it so that if that next generation wants to come back to the farm, they're there and capable and able to do so. And that's ultimately where today's discussion boils down to. But the how might look a little different for this generation that's being raised rather than the generation that we grew up in. So I want to dive into that today and talking about where are some areas that we can really help make sure that the children are staying safe on farm. And I'm going to pass it over to you to get us started on that.
Excellent. And Amber, I love having conversations and discussions. So if at any point I'm presenting and a question comes in, please feel free to interrupt me, stop me, ask that question, and I'd love to answer it in that way. Otherwise, it gets to be a boring presentation and people start to zone out. So feel free to interrupt and have more of a conversation with me. But like I said, I'm at the Children's Center, the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety, and we're located in Marshfield, Wisconsin. And we have some statistics, and people may have heard these statistics before, they may not have, but we pretty much all know, if we're farmers, we pretty much know that agriculture is one of the most dangerous occupations in our nation. And the other thing is that farming is the only work site where children of any age can be present legally. So if we think about people working construction, whether they're building buildings or working on the roads, if we think about people going into the office, if we think about teachers in a classroom, really the only time we can take our own children into our work sites is when we're farming. And because it's the most dangerous, we see a lot of injuries and we see a lot of fatalities. And so that's something that we want to work to prevent. And I just want to point out a couple of these statistics right here. And I want us to kind of think about this as we go through the presentation today. And one of those is that about every 3 days in the United States, a child will die from an agriculture-related incident. And that is too many of our children. That is too many of our farm children dying. Another one that I want to share is that actually 60% of those injuries that happen to children happen when they're not actually working. So the child, it's not like a teenager who had a task on the farm and is working. It's usually either a very young child is on the farm and not being supervised well enough. And we all know children, toddlers, they get into the most trouble so fast. They're always moving, always running. So we see that. We also see when people come to visit a farm. So it might be one of your children's friends coming to visit. It might be going to an agritourism venue. And a lot of our generations now, a lot of our populations are 4 or more generations removed from the farm. So they don't always know what the hazards are. They don't understand that what they're doing could be risky. And so we need to make sure that when children are on the farm but not working, that they're very well taken care of. As I continue on, I want to tell you just a little bit more background about the National Farm Medicine Center and the National Children's Center. The National Farm Medicine Center actually started in 1981. It was established in 1981. And the reason it was established was because all these farmers were coming into the clinic with farmer's lung. And a nurse said, how can we prevent this? How can we stop this? And I mean, the answer was so clear. People needed to wear masks when they were in dusty areas on the farm. And so she said, well, that doesn't even take a lot of research, but we can prevent it. So she started up, Dr. Barbara Lee started up the National Farm Medicine Center. And we started doing research and talking to farmers about how to keep them safe. Well, then fast forward a couple of years, and Barb said, I am seeing so many children injured and killed on farms. How can we prevent that? So she actually went out to Washington, D.C. and said, hey, we need some help to keep children safe. And they said, yeah, you start the organization, we'll give you the money. And so they did. They created a grant through NIOSH. And because of that grant, we were able to start the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety. And for the last over 25 years now, we have been able to do research, come up with services, and protect children. And we have seen the number of child deaths and injuries decline since the start of the Children's Center. Fast forward another couple of years, and another center started up, the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center, or UMASH. And we also play a very strong role in their center. And they also are funded with NIOSH funds. And they work on a lot of zoonotic diseases and how that affects people of all ages. And they also look a lot at aging on the farm and how can we keep our older population safe. We're not going to talk about that today, but also very interesting research. Here at the National Farm Medicine Center and the National Children's Center, everything starts with research. So we start looking at what are causing incidents, what are causing fatalities. And we talk with farmers, we do research, and then we come up with our findings. And a lot of times we'll publish those in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. But not many farmers are picking up and reading scientific journals. For one thing, they just don't have time. And for another thing, they're usually written in a very technical way that just puts most people to sleep, including other scientists sometimes. So then what we do is we take that research and we translate it, and we translate it into shorter bursts of information so that we can share that out with our farmers and our communities and kind of tell them, well, this is what we found. And then finally, we take it to service. And so some of our service is things like helping to pay for farmers to retrofit an older tractor with a rollover bar or a rollover protection structure. Another example is helping for farmers to be able to put up a safe play area for their children so that they're not in the work site. Another service is creating different trainings. So we used some of our funding and we partnered with a team in Iowa who actually created a whole website on how to train adults to become better supervisors. So we create services that then we're able to give back to our farmers. So, with that research, what have we found? We have found what the top 3 causes of injury and fatality are. So, the top 3 causes of children deaths on farms is machinery, number 1. And a lot of times that's a runover, like a tractor runover. Number 2 is motor vehicles. So, that can include ATVs, UTVs, it can include farm trucks, those types of machinery or vehicles. And then the third one is actually drowning. And here in Wisconsin, we don't think a lot about drowning. Throughout the United States, we see a lot more with irrigation ditches. But here in Wisconsin, we do see children drowning in manure pits. And also, when children get into grain bins, that's also considered a drowning, because if a child gets pulled into the grain, what happens is the pressure on the chest is so strong that you can no longer breathe and you end up suffocating. It's not usually from choking on the corn, it's usually from the pressure on your chest. So that's considered a drowning as well. And then the top 3 causes of injuries, and these are serious injuries, is falls. So we see either falling from one level to another. So maybe they're up in a haymow and they fall down through a chute. Maybe they're up on a tractor and they fall off, they fall down off the tractor. So falls from one level down to another, or trips, slips, and falls. So like when they're maybe running down the walkway in the barn and it's slippery and they slip and they fall, or, things like that count too. Or here in Wisconsin, sometimes even if we have icy situations. Our next one is animals actually cause a lot of injuries to our youth. And then finally, again, we're back to machinery and vehicles. Skid steers, ATVs, tractors are causing a lot of injuries as well.
So, Melissa, before we move on from that, quick clarifying question for you here in regards to the main causes of injury and fatalities. Is this just in regard to children, or is this for children and adults?
So in this set of research, this is for children.
And okay, so being that it's just children when talking about right here, right now with what we've got on the screen, but when it comes to it, how different is it in terms of, what if you add in the adult injury and fatalities, or is it pretty similar across fatal and non-fatal?
So this is a hard question to answer because the government used to give funding for surveillance, and they would look at every injury, every fatality that happened on farms. They do it in the census, and they actually stopped that research in the early 2000s. And so it is hard to say now what exactly the trends are. I'm glad that you bring that up, though, because we do have a program, and it's called aginjurynews.org. So that would be aginjurynews.org. And you can actually go to that. You can sign in. You have to sign up in order to get in there, but it's totally free. So you have to start a profile, but totally free. And you can search for different injuries or fatalities happening in the United States. And it's really a great thing because you can filter out what you're interested in. So to answer your question, if you wanted to know injuries, adult injuries in Wisconsin, you could filter all of that out. And what these injury reports are is they actually come from media reports. So this isn't going to be 100% of the incidents that are taking place. And we know that. But it does give you a good idea of what the current trends are. And what I would say that we are noticing is we are noticing that tractors are still one of the top injuries for children and adults. The other thing that we're seeing really increase is roadway incidents. So tractors on roadways and other drivers, those incidents are happening a lot more often. We know our farms are getting bigger. We know that in order to get bigger, we have to have more land. We have to get to that land. We need to use the roadways as farmers. And then sometimes our other drivers just aren't aware of how slow that machinery is really moving. Or sometimes there's just those blind spots and tractors don't see the other vehicles. So that's another really big trend that we're seeing. And then as far as youth, I guess it's adults and youth, but another really big trend right now is ATV and UTV incidents. Starting in 2020, we saw purchasing ATVs and UTVs just skyrocket because everybody wanted to be outside during the pandemic. How do you do that? you recreationally ride four-wheelers or side-by-sides. And people are not wearing their helmets. They are not buckling in. And we're letting youth drive before they're really ready to do that, before they're heavy enough, before they're large enough, and before they have like the maturity to do that. So those are the trends that we're seeing with adults and youth. Good question. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for going into that because I was curious, when we're thinking about these areas, it's not that it's just important to think about these in terms of our youth, which it definitely is, do not get me wrong, but they translate over very much into adulthood as well. They don't just disappear once you hit a certain age, if you will. So I just wanted to make sure and just curious about what the trends were for those. So I'll let you keep going on here though.
Thank you. Thank you. And then we see a lot of illness and health issues too that we touch on. So we still have COVID as one of our illnesses, but now we would actually add to that the H5N1 or the avian influenza, and also zoonotic diseases. So any disease that you can get from an animal. So it could be ringworm, pink eye, salmonella, E. coli. We look at a lot of those and how those can be prevented. We talk a lot about hearing and vision problems, dust and molds. I already talked about farmers' lungs, and then just the other hazards on the farm. And those are the things that we really research and look at. And so we said, okay, we know what the top causes of injuries and fatalities are. So what are the top strategies? And that's what I'm going to really touch on next is what are the top strategies to keep our youth safe when they are growing up on the farm? So the first strategy for us is keep kids away from tractors. So we know tractors are the number one cause of child death. And we never want any parent to go through the trauma of knowing that they were driving a tractor when it ran over their child, or a grandparent, or an aunt or uncle. We don't want anyone to go through that. So what we say is keep kids away from your tractors. So the number one reason that children actually get injured or die with tractors is because of runovers. And a lot of times when we give our children rides in the tractor, they view the tractor as kind of entertainment. And so anytime they see a tractor, they want to go for a ride. So they will run towards the tractor so that they can get a ride. And as our tractors continue to get bigger and bigger, the blind spots are more and more. We can't see when children come running up to the tractor. And so when children come running up to the tractor, a lot of times they get run over. But children in general have kind of a healthy fear of anything that's large and loud. So they already have kind of a healthy fear of that tractor. They're going to kind of stand farther away just to keep themselves safe because they're kind of scared of it. And so if we just kind of let them have that healthy fear, do not let them ride because then they consider that fun, but don't let them ride. Then they know to stay far enough away. And hopefully that way, we can really lower the number of runovers.
Well, and Melissa, before we began, we had a little bit of a conversation here about tractors and children around tractors. And I think it'd be really interesting for our listeners to hear as well, some of the reasons maybe not to have children inside the tractor cab with you, because when you were going about explaining some of them, it really enlightened me into some of the risks that you just aren't aware of.
Yeah, a lot of people think that in a tractor now, because they're bigger, in a tractor, there's a buddy seat. And it's enclosed, like your doors are closed. However, that's actually created to be an instructor seat. And so that's a really good terminology to remember. That's not your buddy. That's not a buddy seat. That's an instructor seat. So that's for an instructor to sit when they're training a teenager or another person who's learning to drive the tractor with an implement on behind. So when we take our little buddies in the tractor with us, and I know some people will put a car seat in and strap in their infant, or sometimes their toddler, or sometimes they'll just let them ride along. However, the problems that we see are before youth are about that 12 to 14 age, their bodies are still developing, they're still growing, and their brains actually are a little bit smaller than their skulls. And so that vibration is actually causing damage to their brain as an infant or a toddler. And that constant vibration, if they ride for longer than 20 minutes, that vibration can actually do damage to their brains. The other thing is the noise in the tractor. Our children, our very young children, their eardrums are not totally developed yet either. So we can actually cause damage to their hearing as a very young child. So as an infant, as a toddler, we can actually give them hearing loss already as a 2-year-old. And the problem with that, the biggest problem with that is as they grow then and as they start to go to school, if they have any type of hearing loss, they will actually learn at a slower rate because they just don't hear pitch as well. So then they don't always pick up on all the words. They also don't understand all the articulation of words because they can't hear those extra, those extra little articulation in our grammar. And so they will actually learn at a slower rate. So by taking our young children in the tractor with us as our little buddy in our little buddy seat, we're actually causing them lifelong damage. And so that's another reason to sometimes keep kids out of the tractor. And a lot of people will say, hey, I mean, my grandpa rode with his dad, and then my dad rode with my grandpa, and I rode with my dad, and now I want to take my son or my daughter out with me. I understand that. I understand that it's a tradition and it's fun. However, it is easier to bury a tradition than it is to bury a child. And I know a really good friend of mine, Troy Boomsma, and his son was run over by a tractor. And he says, looking back, he wishes that as a family, they had just said, no tractor rides, because to not have his son now, he can't have any new traditions, and he can't even keep going with the old traditions of Easter and Christmas and holidays and whatever it is. And so he says that's one tradition he wished his family had buried first. So something to just keep in mind and think about.
Well, I appreciate you going through that and talking about burying a tradition that might not be serving your family in the long run, especially as when we think about, it's very easy to say it's not going to happen to our family, it's not going to be us. But then when you add in the other risks associated, especially for young children, of being in the tractor cab, it really goes to show that it sounds so much better than it actually is. And that there are reasons more than just we're it's not going to happen to us. It's not something we need to worry about. So many more things to be thinking about. So I'll let you keep going on because I know there's more than just tractors that we're going to get to here this afternoon.
Yeah, and I will keep going. We have some more strategies. My next strategy is keeping young children out of the work site. So I talked earlier about how 60% of youth that are injured or killed on farms aren't even working at the time. And so this is really important when we say, if you're working, you should be working. If you're parenting or supervising children, you should be parenting or supervising. And those two things shouldn't be happening at the same time. Again, we know children can get into the craziest situations in a matter of seconds. Anyone who has a child of their own, a niece, a nephew, siblings, or even a neighbor kid, you know how fast they can sneak away and be in a spot that you don't want them to be in. And so that's why it's so important. When an adult is working, they shouldn't also be supervising a child. And trust me, we do know how challenging this is because childcare around farm areas is not always accessible. Growing up myself, my mom kept us at home and we had a farm. And she said if she had wanted to take us to a daycare, she would have had to drive an hour to Wausau. At the time, it was an hour. Now it's only about 45 minutes with the improved infrastructure of our roads. But she would have had to drive an hour to Wausau to drop us off, drive an hour home to do her chores, then drive an hour back to pick us up. So it would have been 4 hours on the road a day just so that we had some childcare. And we know that that's a challenge. We also know that affording childcare is almost impossible. And so, we say don't take your kids into the work site. We tell you to be a farmer, but then what do you do with your children when you need to work? And some things that we kind of talk about is we talk about maybe hiring a babysitter. Maybe you can get a teenager or a high school student to come and babysit for you for a couple hours. Maybe a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle is a way to do it. Or maybe if you and your spouse are farming together, maybe one of you is doing the milking while the other one's inside with the kids, and then you swap and one of you goes out to feed while the other one comes in to take care of the children. So those are some other options. Another thing that we talk about a lot is having a safe play area. And you can see I have some pictures there of kids playing on playgrounds. And the biggest thing about these pictures is that in all three of them, you can see that there is a fence around the playground. And so we talk about creating a physical barrier, because if you have a playground for your children, and even if you're out there watching them, you look away for 1 second to answer a text message on your phone and they are running into the farm. And it's interesting because a child might see, maybe their mom is coming home with the tractor and they're so excited to see mom and they go running out to that tractor. And again, she can't see them. But if there's that physical barrier there, they can't get past that. So she can't run them over. And we can tell our children, okay, remember, you cannot go off the grass. You have to stay on the grass, never go off of it. But toddlers and, even 8, 9, 10-year-olds, they just forget. They get so excited that they forget that. So having a physical barrier with your safe play areas is very important. Another strategy we talk about is ensuring age-appropriate work. So now this is more getting to our teenagers. So when our teenagers start to work on the farm, and I guess they're not always teenagers, we maybe see 10-year-olds starting to feed calves. Maybe they're doing maybe they can scrape down poop in the barns, so we see them start to go out to the barn and start to do some tasks. And that's really great. I mean, we're teaching them responsibility. We're getting them out and getting them excited about farming. There's nothing wrong with having your children do some of the tasks on the farm, but just make sure that they are of an appropriate age and appropriate ability level to do those tasks. So a great example is I used to teach tractor safety, and I would teach some 12-year-olds who could, push in the clutch on the tractor, push in the brake, and still look over their shoulder and watch the implement behind them. They were tall enough, they were strong enough. I taught some 16-year-olds who were just petite little things. And in order to push in the clutch, they had to stand on it and jump up and down. In that case, that child is just probably not ready to be out on the tractor. They just need some more weight and some more growth to them. The other thing that we look at is the maturity level of children. And so maybe your 14-year-old is totally ready to be out on the tractor all alone driving the rake. And maybe you have another child, and when they get to be 14 years old, they just can't focus. They're looking at the deer, they're reaching for their phone, they're like playing with their hair while they're driving tractor. They're maybe just not ready yet to be doing that task. And so really kind of looking at your children or the youth that maybe you're hiring to work on your farm, and making sure that they're really ready to do each individual task. And so to help out with that, we created the Ag Youth Work Guidelines. And you can see on my screen there's a webpage for that at www.cultivatesafety.org/work. And what these are is we took the 50 most common tasks that youth do on the farm, and we said, okay, what are the hazards and how can we mitigate those hazards? So you will find PDFs, like little flyers that give you those tasks, and it says, here's what your child needs to know to be able to do it. Here are the hazards of that task, and here are some ways that you can protect them. So maybe it's wearing personal protective equipment, maybe it's additional training, whatever it might be. There's also an interactive piece to it, and you can see that in my pictures on the bottom there. It will actually ask you some questions about your children. So it will say, is the youth mature enough to know that they always have to wear their seatbelt when driving tractor? And you click yes or no. Does your child, and okay, I'm going to a different task now, but does your child understand when an animal is becoming restless, and do they know how to exit? Yes or no. And you'll click yes, no, yes, no, yes, no for all of these questions. And at the end, it'll either say, wonderful, your child is ready to do this task, or you'll see there, it'll say stop. This job does not appear to be a good fit for this youth age and ability. And it helps you kind of pick when your children or the children you're hiring are ready for those tasks.
So Melissa, this is a really great tool that kind of takes the bias out of when a child is ready. I want to go back a second though, when we're talking about your experience with helping for tractor safety. And I can only imagine in that role that you see not only a lot of abilities, but also ranges in experience, if you will, for kids that age. And I think becoming a little less common, but it's still something that's very common in agriculture is to have kids at a younger age driving tractor, driving skid loaders, driving ATVs. I know there's no easy way to be like hard and fast rule, this is an age or this is an ability, but for some of those common ones that are especially a lot bigger machinery, is there a way to help determine, aside from maybe just going to cultivatesafety.org, kind of, gauging that of what actually makes sense? Because it's still common to find some young kids who I think are better tractor drivers than most adults.
That's true. When I taught tractor safety, I had an older high schooler who would help me with the driving test portion, and he could back up a tractor with a trailer like no problem. And I had to like go slow and really think about it. No one could be talking to me. Yeah, so you're right. Some youth are just better at that, even sometimes better than adults like myself. And I grew up driving tractors. Um, and you're right. So I'm going to tell you some interesting statistics that sometimes we don't know. But did you know that in Wisconsin, we are the only state that allows 12-year-olds to get a tractor safety certification? Every other state in the nation, it's 14 years old. We're the only state that allows 12-year-olds to get that certification. So interesting fact. And are 12-year-olds really ready? Are they really mature enough? Are they developed enough? And that's actually a conversation that we've been having here in Wisconsin and nationally to see, like, should Wisconsin change their state regulations? And I think when it really comes down to it, I think as a parent, you know your children and you do know when your child is ready. But it's important that you are strong enough as the adult to sometimes say no. So my oldest brother got to start driving tractor at 12 years old because he took the tractor safety course. My dad, he wanted to drive. My dad wanted him to drive. He got to start driving at 12. When I turned 12, I wanted to drive tractor. And I do remember my parents saying no. I remember my dad saying, you're not ready. Like, you are not ready to be out there alone in the field. Back then, we didn't have cell phones. If something happened, what was I going to do? And so it's important that as adults, we really look at our children. We look at their mental capacity. We look at their maturity. We look at their size, and we make good decisions for their safety. And that we're strong enough to say no sometimes. And I think that's kind of what you're asking. And I think, yeah, when it comes down to it, as parents, we know our kids. And if you're hiring youth to do a task, you should always do some additional training and some additional supervision with them. And one way that we teach adults to finally decide if a youth is ready to do a task is by telling the adult, make the youth explain the task back to you. Don't ask them yes and no questions. So if you say, do you know to wear your seatbelt? They'll say, oh, yeah. But if you say, explain to me from the time you walk up to the tractor until the time you drive away, what you're going to do to get out to the field. You want to hear them say, I'm going to get on the tractor using 3 points of contact. I'm going to sit in the seat. I'm going to buckle my seatbelt. And then I'm going to start I'm going to push in the clutch. I'm going to start the tractor. So making them go through the steps, you'll also realize if they're ready to do a task. Another thing I really want to strongly kind of talk about here is ATVs are created for people 16 to 18 years of age or older. They are created for the length of the arms and the length of the legs, and they are created for the weight of someone 16, 18, or older. When we put younger children on the ATV, they usually cannot reach appropriately and they can't lean with the machine. And so a lot of times we'll see rollovers and really severe injuries, if not death, because those machines are just not created for those younger children. And so when we let our younger children get on and drive, it's just not a machine that was designed for them. They do make smaller ATVs for younger children. And so if your children really want to ride, or if you really want to let them drive, maybe purchasing a smaller machine is important. Same thing with skid steers. They are designed for 18-year-old plus. like older than 18. And a lot of times you'll have the joysticks with your hands and you'll have operations with your feet. Also, there's so many blind spots, like the way that it's built. And so sometimes you'll have a backup mirror, sometimes you won't. But being able for your mind to really manage hands, feet, and like paying attention to all of your surroundings, that's really designed for 18 years old and above. So when we put younger children into a skid steer, we're really putting them in a very hazardous, very scary situation. And we might think that our own children are ready, but the manufacturers are saying they're probably not.
Well, I appreciate you talking about the skid loaders there for a second because I feel like, and this is maybe just the bias of where I grew up, I feel like it was if you're able to drive a skid loader, you're able to drive a tractor. But really, it's not necessarily reverse, but it just goes to show that there's so much more to be thinking about in something like a skid loader, well, even in a tractor too with the clutch, but there's more to be thinking about than just turning a key and going. It's never that simple, especially we all know within agriculture, but the fact that, when we think about, okay, it's designed for 18 plus, that really does mean 18 plus for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing is when you take a tractor safety course, and like I said, I used to teach this, and in the workbook that we were given by the state, by extension, there were 2 pages of skid steer information. It was a front and a back page, and it was the last chapter of the tractor safety course. And teachers who are teaching tractor safety, whether it's an ag teacher or it's an extension agent, whoever it is, they're really not supposed to teach skid steer safety during a tractor safety class because you're teaching to 12 or 14-year-olds and you really shouldn't be driving that until you're 18. So they're also not getting proper training. So if you think that your child came home from tractor safety, so they're ready to drive a skid steer now, they are not training them on skid steer safety because they can't, because it's not legal for them to drive. So they're not training them. So that's something else to remember as well, is that they're not getting that training.
I think that's a really good point and just a really good thing to know if you weren't aware prior. So I'll let you keep going on, but I appreciate you taking my side tangents here.
No, I love it. Thank you. Another strategy that we talk about is ensuring the environment is as safe as possible. And a lot of times we do this with personal protective equipment. So making sure that they're wearing their helmet if they are going to be on the four-wheeler, the ATV or the UTV, making sure that they know to wear their seatbelts. This is something else that a lot of people don't know, but in a tractor that has a rollover protection structure, you have to also have the seatbelt in order to really be safe in the event of a rollover. Even in a cab tractor, you should always wear your seatbelt because if that tractor rolls over, the likeliness that windows and things will break around you is high and you can be ejected. But if you have your seatbelt on, it keeps you in that space underneath that rollover protection structure. And so we call that your place to live. So making sure that your youth are always wearing their seatbelt when they're driving the tractor. Hearing protection is huge. If you have hearing loss prior to 40 years of age, you're twice as likely to have dementia when you're old. So let me say that one more time. If you have any hearing loss prior to 40 years of age, you are twice as likely to have dementia as you age. Again, it's because you can't hear and you can't articulate, and eventually your brain starts to slow down, and then you get Alzheimer's or dementia. And we don't want anyone to have to live through that. So protect their hearing when they're young, protect your hearing now as adults, wear those earmuffs or put in those earplugs. It's so important. And so keeping the environment as safe as possible in that way, but also keeping your areas clean. So we talked a little bit about slips and trips are some of the top causes of injury, both for children and adults. So making sure that we pick up our tools after we're done using them and put them away, or making sure that we're using lime on the walkways, or if a drinking cup or a water tank runs over, that we're kind of cleaning up that water. And again, we're using some lime to make sure that our environment is just safe. Another safety strategy that we have is, as I said before, providing training. And that's so important. So telling a youth or telling a child how to do a task before they start, and then having them repeat it back to you so that you know that they understood, and then having them practice it until they are proficient and ready to do it. And then finally, always supervising youth. So always checking in with them. You might have a teenager who's 18 years old and they've been feeding calves since they were 10. You should still check in with them once in a while as they're feeding calves and just like make sure that they are wearing their rubber gloves so that they're not getting bleach from the cleaning on their skin. Make sure that they are wearing their safety glasses. So again, if something splashes, they're not getting some of those zoonotic diseases that they can get. So just always checking in with them. Supervise them 100% of the time while you need to, and then doing some supervision still where you're checking in on them. The other thing that's so important is to always model safe behaviors. So if you tell children that they have to wear their seatbelts in the tractor, you should be as an adult too. If you tell children that they need to wear safety glasses when they're milking cows so that the tails don't scratch their eyes, you should be wearing safety glasses as well. So doing what you tell them they do is important as well. And I want to talk specifically, I have a QR code up here, so if you're watching, you can take a picture of this, but this is a great training that I talked about earlier about how can adults become better trainers. Not all of us went to school for education. Not all of us know how to be a teacher. Sometimes we understand it, so we just think someone else should understand it. So if you tell a youth like, okay, well, you have to milk cows, you have to spray the iodine, then you wipe it off with this paper towel, and then you put the unit on, you understand it. So you think, well, that's enough training. But they don't know, well, how many times do I spray it? Does each teat get 6 sprays or 1 spray? And what do I do with this paper towel after I'm done? Do I keep it? Do I put it in my pocket? Does it go in the gutter? Does it go underneath the cow? And then how do I even put this unit on? Like, I got to turn a valve. I have to put on one at a time. What if the cow is kicking? Do I keep going? And so not all of us were trained on how to be a good teacher. And so this is a great resource to kind of help you take a step back and look at tasks in a different way to help you better train youth that are either working on your farm or living on your farm. So really great training tool there.
So Melissa, before we move on from that real quick, because I love that exists and is available for producers who are trying to be better at teaching and training. But when we're talking about youth versus adults, how should training be different? Because we know youth learn differently than adults, but a lot of people think, well, I've got a good training in process and I do the same thing what I do for adults for youth. But is there any differences that need to be adjusted for age?
Yes. As adults, we just have a lot more experience in a lot more things. We've been around longer, we're older, we're wiser, right? We're a little bit more seasoned. Youth aren't always as experienced. And so, like I said before, you have to, I'm just going to go back one more slide, have them practice it until they're proficient. And it might take longer with a youth than it does with an adult. You might have to spend more time with them doing the task. And sometimes you think to yourself, I could do this task so much faster if I just did it myself. That's true. That's true. But then they will never learn. So by putting in that extra time up front and having them practice it over and over until you know that they're proficient is really going to help them to be able to do a better job, a safer job. The task is going to get done better and faster later when they do it that way as well. So yes, I would say with youth, have them practice more than you would have an adult practice. And then the other thing is, again, with youth, they tend to get distracted a lot faster. They actually tell you when you're in teacher school, they say, consider the age of a person, the number of minutes that they can focus. So if you are teaching a 10-year-old how to do a task, they can probably focus for 10 minutes. If you're teaching a 20-year-old how to do a task, they can probably focus for 20 minutes. A 50-year-old can probably focus for like an hour. But a 10-year-old, they can only really listen to you for about 10 minutes and then you've lost them. And so you need to repeat yourself. You need to engage them, make them tell you what they're doing, make sure they practice it until they're proficient. So everything's a little bit more repetitive with the younger generations.
So it's just having a little more patience to make sure that it's getting across. But I appreciate you talking about that because sometimes it's easy to think, especially as you get some older teenagers, that they should just be able to do it and learn like others. And there's still a little more practice and patience that needs to be had. But I'll let you keep going here.
Great points. I'm glad you bring those up. Another strategy that we have is we actually have a booklet called Hired Agricultural Youth Work Guidelines. So it's actually very similar to our other work guidelines where it has the common tasks that youth are hired to do, and it helps you walk through when is a youth ready to do the task. But a little bit more about this is this will actually share some rules and regulations for the different states that you might live in. So how many hours can a youth actually work before they need to have a break? Or how many hours like during school time, they can work for a different amount of hours than what it is during the summer on a farm. And this booklet will tell you some of that. And again, I have a QR code on there. So if you get out your phone, you should be able to take a picture of that and go right to the webpage. But this is for the farmers who are hiring teenagers to come and work on your farm. So maybe you have kids, maybe you don't have kids, but you need some more help. And so you hire someone from the local high school, or you hire someone who's just graduating high school and they're going to come work on your farm. This will help you pick the tasks that are appropriate for them, whether they have the experience or don't. And then it'll also help you know some of the rules and regulations. So if something does happen, you and your farm are still protected. I mean, we don't want any injuries or fatalities to happen, but if something does, because you've read this and followed along with this, you'll know what was legal. We talked a little bit about this one too, and that's just say no. So both of these stories, we sometimes use storytelling to help us teach farmers or teach adults like what incidents can occur and how did they occur. And a lot of times storytelling will open up somebody's mind more than those statistics. But in both of these situations, the parents and the grandparents say, we wish when our child begged to do whatever, ride the ATV, pet the cow, go in by the pigs, we wish we had just, or ride the tractor, we wish we had just said no. And after that child is gone, like in both of these situations, both of these two children passed far too young. And both of the families say, we wish we'd have been stronger parents and we'd have just said no. So that's something else that's a great strategy as well. We do have a couple other resources, and I see we're getting almost to the top of the hour, so I won't spend too much time on these. But if you go on our website, again, www.cultivatesafety.org, we have an organization called the Child Egg Safety Network, or we call it CASN. And if anyone out there is interested in keeping youth safe, whether it's your own children, your neighbors, your grandchildren, whatever, you can join this network for free. And what we do is many minds come together and come up with some great tools. So this is where the Keep Kids Off Tractors and the Bury a Tradition, Not a Child came from. We also have a media guidelines resource on there. And what that one is about showing a culture of safety at all times. So if you have a Facebook page, if you have an Instagram page, if you're watching TikTok and posting your own farming videos, always post safe ones. Because if you post safe pictures, it helps everyone in the audience think about a safety culture. If you're posting yourself with your toddler in that instructor seat in the tractor, then everyone else thinks, well, neighbor Bill is doing it, I'm going to do it too. Or if you post that cute video of grandpa taking your 5-year-old out mowing lawn, and then the blades are running and that 5-year-old's riding on grandpa's lap, it's cute, but it's not safe. And again, if someone's like, well, we let him ride with grandpa, we might as well let him ride with Auntie June or with mom or dad. And so if we, on our social media pages, if we show safe pictures of farming, it creates a safety culture in our minds and it keeps everyone a little safer. And then we also came up with the campaign, Parent First, Farmer Second. So if you do have kids on the farm, That's great. It's a great place for kids to grow up. We know that they're actually healthier. They're less likely to get allergies and asthma if they grow up on the farm. We know that they have great work ethics. They understand where their food comes from, but just remember that there are a lot of hazards too. So be a parent first. Something else that this organization came up with just recently is they said we're seeing far too many children run over by lawnmowers while the blades are running. And we have these horribly maimed children. And then they try to live the rest of their lives, a lot of times as an amputee. And they said, what can we do? So we actually have a campaign coming out. It's all online. And we're just going to start promoting it actually next month. But the safety of lawnmowers and children around lawnmowers. So if you have a trend and you're like, this is an area I think that we need to touch on and we need to educate our community about, then definitely join our network and help us do that. And I also already talked about this resource, the aginjurynews.org. So again, if you want to know what are some of the trends, what are some of the injuries, what are some of the fatalities happening in your area or anywhere in the United States, and any age, you can pick adults or you can pick 18 and younger. And then you can pick specific types too, if you want. And you can actually have a report sent to you weekly if there are any of these injuries mentioned in the news. So go check out aginjurynews.org and keep track of what are the trending injuries and fatalities in your area and how can you continue to prevent them. And again, this is about that network I was talking about. So if you want to, I feel like those should be kind of swapped around, but that's all right. If you want to join that network with us, we would love to have you. www.cultivatesafety.com/Hassan. And you go on there and you can sign up so that you can get email updates. You can join meetings and webinars. You can share your thoughts with us and we can create new campaigns as needed. So I see we are just about at time and I'm just getting to the end. So Amber, this has been lovely and I'd love to answer any other questions. But before I do, if people want to connect with us outside of this webinar and outside of the Dairy Signal, this is some ways that they can get a hold of us.
So, Melissa, I think one of the really interesting things that comes about when we talk about raising kids on farms is that there is such a variety of chores and things that they can be doing. And I want to reiterate that you're not discouraging youth and children being on farm, but having more age appropriate jobs for them. But, when we think about having kids on farm, what kind of is that more ideal age to start? I mean, and granted, I know this is very much what's more appropriate for them. But if we were to talk about an age, is there a better age to have kids to really start having more of those chores on farm? Obviously with supervision as needed and as age appropriate and appropriate for their abilities. But what do you typically see that tends to lean better towards more success and more safety?
And like you just said, that's such a hard question to answer because an age and an ability level is so different. And so if I say a 10-year-old can start with chores, some 10-year-olds definitely can. And some kids were ready already before 10, and some just really are not ready. And so I think more importantly than really talking about an age, it's really talking about adult awareness is probably the most important. And just being aware of what your children are doing and what they're enjoying and what they can focus on. And again, remembering, I kind of talked about how long can a child focus. So if a 10-year-old can only focus for about 10 minutes, giving them a task that's going to take a half an hour might not be the best. So finding small tasks for them to do in the beginning is probably also very important. So for a 10-year-old, maybe it takes 10 minutes to scrape down the poop from the cows. If you have a stanchion barn, right? Maybe it takes 10 minutes to scrape down all the cows. Maybe that's a good task to get them started with because they can focus that long, they can get it done, and then they can go take a little break. So I think two things, just adult awareness and then starting small, right? Starting with kind of baby steps is important too. Or maybe, you feed a bale of hay to the dry cows And again, maybe that's an easy enough task. You as the adult move the bale because maybe it's too heavy. And then, they can like shake out the slabs for the dry cows, a small task. Start small and then you can build from there. And I think that that's important as well. And you're right.
Yeah.
You're not discouraging having children on the farm. We have another study that shows that um, moms who are pregnant and working on the farm, their children are less likely to have allergies and asthma. So we are telling you to have your kids on the farm before they're even born. We think that's a great idea. We have no problems with that. But just once they are born, supervising them and just keeping them out of hazardous situations is important.
Well, and I have to say, I appreciate the way that you switched it around and phrased it as being, more adult awareness on that, especially as they begin and start being more on farm. I think that's a great way to look at it instead of giving it an age, a number, or an ability. But with all that being said, and especially as we're getting close to our time here, I do want to ask you our last question of the day is, we've covered a lot. And there's a lot for parents and supervisors and adults to be thinking about when it comes to safety on the farm, especially for our toddlers all the way up to our teens. But what's one or two key takeaways that you want producers to be thinking about or actively doing after today's discussion?
Perfect. My one key takeaway is be a parent first. So being a parent means that you keep them safe, but it means that you teach them. It means that sometimes you discipline and sometimes you love, right? And if they want to be in the barn with you, take them out there and supervise them, as little children. Take them out there and supervise them, love them, give them what they want, but make sure that they're supervised. As they grow and they want to start doing tasks, great. And if they do something unsafe, as an adult, as a parent, sometimes we need to discipline. And so do that. If you have to take their phone away because they won't stop looking at it when they're driving the tractor, take their phone away, So whatever you do, just be a parent first and a farmer second. And remember that the majority of farms that have someone pass away on the farm, whether it's the adult or the child, the majority of those farmers lose their farm, whether it's because of grief or because of the cost of medical or the cost of a funeral, they will lose the farm. And so be a parent first and take care of your child first and then farm second, because without your child, you won't have the farm. So, and I don't want to stop on a sad note, but I just want to say, yeah, be a parent first and teach your kids, love your kids, discipline your kids, and be a farmer second.
Well, I think that is a great message to end on. I think it's an important one nonetheless, even if, it has a little bit of a tone to it of reflection in there. But I think it reminds all of us that there are more ways that we can always be safe on a farm and really making sure that we're doing our best, not only for ourselves, but for all the young ones that might be around as well. But Melissa, thank you so much for your time here this afternoon. It was a true pleasure to have you on, and I appreciate all the insight and information you were able to give our audience here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Amber. It was a pleasure to talk with you today.
I also have to say thanks to those who are joining and watching, whether you're live or after the fact. We appreciate that you've taken the time to not only learn and grow and better yourself, but hopefully in this case as well, making sure that you can better for the youth in your life as well. For now, though, thank you for joining us here today, and we'll see you here next week on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.